Hello, everyone. Tonight we are standing in the dark on the edge of something that shouldn't be alive anymore. You are ankle deep in frost, the crunch of ancient ice beneath your boots making the only sound in a world that forgot movement. There's no wind here, no birds, no heartbeat, except yours fast and uncomfortably loud as you stare at a tiny black speck pressed against the inside of a chunk of ice. This thing you're looking at hasn't twitched in 9,000 years. It hasn't eaten. It hasn't breathed. It's not dead, though most scientists wouldn't bet money on that at first glance. This somehow is a creature whose best survival strategy is doing absolutely nothing. For thousands of years, the world has spun through empires, extinctions, and entire languages evolving and dying. And it's just been chilling here, literally. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Also, post your location and what time it is where you're watching from. Let's see how far across time zones this little sleeper has wandered. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You press your nose to the frostbitten glass of this ancient block. It's not museum glass. It's fieldwork. Cold. The kind of glass that fogs and stings your lips if you breathe too close. Inside a midge. Tiny, wingless, unbothered by history. Not a mosquito, though its distant cousins might have ruined your camping trips. This one's special. This one has outlived the very definition of normal. The Antarctic midge. Belgica antarctica is just a few millimeters long. You wouldn't notice it if it landed on your coat, assuming it ever did, which it won't because it can't fly. No wings. That's one way it survives these hostile places. No flying means no freezing midair and shattering like a snowflake with legs. The cold air hits your throat as you speak aloud just to hear something move still alive in there. The answer, if it came, would sound like the scratch of snow against snow. But here's the thing. This bug has been frozen solid. Not just hiding from the chill, not snoozing in a burrow, but frozen like a popsicle. It allows its body fluids to turn into glass-like solids. This isn't just hibernation, it's biological magic. You ever put lettuce in the freezer and then try to eat it the next day? It turns into green slime. This bug is made of softer stuff, but it somehow reboots after being frozen to minus 20 or 30 Celsius for years at a time. Historians still debate whether this is true life in the traditional sense. If you're not metabolizing, not moving, not even ticking along on minimal internal processes, are you alive? Or is it more like a paused cassette tape waiting for someone to hit play? And here you are watching it through thick glass trying to sense even the tiniest pulse. But no, this part of the story doesn't come with movement. Not yet. You remember reading something once about the oldest known frozen insect being revived after 17 years of icy imprisonment. Not a midge in that case, but a different tiny survivor. 17 years sounds like a long nap until you consider the timelines this midge is playing with. This is not nap territory. This is let's sleep through the rise of human civilization and wake up to see if the Wi-Fi's better territory. You lean back from the glass and squint. Something catches in your chest. A feeling. Not awe exactly. Not fear. It's more like an echo from something deeper than history. A kinship, maybe, or a warning. Because here's the awkward bit, you probably wouldn't survive one full winter here. Not without heaters, gear, backup power, insulated socks, and a will to live stronger than your caffeine addiction. Meanwhile, this bug just shuts the lights off. Waits, no fuss. You reach into your pocket for your field recorder, press the button, and whisper into the frost. This is day 14, observation 6. Subject remains frozen. No signs of thaw, no decomposition, no movement. It remains intact. Intact, but you trail off. The butt hangs there like your own breath, fogging up the past. Did you know the oldest living animal on record is a clam named Ming? It lived for over 500 years before scientists accidentally killed it while trying to figure out its age. Just goes to show sometimes staying unnoticed is the smartest move. You tuck the recorder away. Outside the tent, the wind sighs across 1,000 miles of silence. Somewhere out there, mammoth bones lie shattered beneath glacial dust. Somewhere, the footprints of creatures long extinct stretch across a frozen riverbed like forgotten lines in a story no one finished writing. And right here, right now, you're watching the punctuation mark at the end of that story. Twitch. You swear it buzz, just a flex. A shift so minor it could have been your breath. But now your eyes are wide, your heart doing tap dance drills in your chest. You lean closer. Did it? You don't know. Maybe nothing happened. Or maybe you just witnessed something return from a timeline no one else remembers. Either way, it's still there, still sleeping, still waiting. And you've got front row seats to the longest nap in history. You hunch closer to the frostbitten container, trying not to breathe too hard on the glass. You'd think this bug that plays dead for centuries, would give some kind of show. A twitch, a shimmer, something. But no. It just lies there like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence you've already forgotten how to read. And yet somehow this isn't death. No, this is something stranger. This is cryobiosis, a process that isn't life, isn't death, and honestly might be a little rude to both. Imagine flipping a switch on your entire body, turning off your metabolism, letting your organs harden, shutting down your nerves. Not sleeping because that implies dreaming. This is silence. Complete biological silence. You wouldn't survive it. Try freezing your liver sometime, see what happens. Actually, don't. Your cells, unlike the midges, are full of water, and water loves to expand into chaos when it freezes. That means ice crystals, jagged, microscopic daggers that rip open your insides like popcorn bursting its bag. Very dramatic, very messy. But Belgica Antarctica doesn't play by your rules. Before freezing, it starts a meticulous shutdown routine, like a spacecraft going into deep sleep. It drains water from its tissues. That's the trick. Less water, fewer ice shards. It replaces that water with sugars and proteins, glassy stuff that doesn't freeze, but instead vitrifies, which is a fancy word for turns into a solid without stabbing you from the inside. Scientists still debate whether this is true suspended animation or something even stranger. Some say it's a biochemical coma. Others argue it's a form of cryptobiosis where life hides literally until the coast is clear. No pulse, no breath, but all the instructions of life still encoded, still waiting. It's like the insect turns into a frozen flash drive, storing everything it needs to resume living when the world stops being so hostile. It's funny, isn't it? Humans make horror movies about frozen corpses reanimating. Meanwhile, this bug has been doing it for millennia with zero dramatic music. You squat beside the container and look at the temperature gauge. Still well below freezing, not that it matters. This creature can survive down to 40 degrees. That's the kind of cold where your eyelashes snap off if you blink too fast. At that temperature, your tears would freeze mid-fall. Your phone would die before you even unlocked it. But this bug? It shrugs. Or it would if it could move its shoulders. And here's the wildest part. This isn't a one-time party trick. It doesn't do this once and die gloriously. It does it over and over, like a well-trained stage actor hitting its marks. Freeze, thaw, freeze, thaw, repeat. Some Antarctic midges have been shown to survive up to 80% of their lives in this frozen limbo. You slide open your field notebook and flip to an earlier page. A doodle of a bug in a parka smiles up at you. Underneath it, your own handwriting scrawls, "When is not alive still alive?" You wish you knew. You adjust your gloves, flexing your fingers. It's getting colder outside. Sunlight doesn't mean warmth here. But you're thinking back to that experiment one done by researchers who tested the limits of this little creature's patience. They froze larvae at intervals 10 days, 30 days, up to 90 days, then thawed them out. Some took minutes to recover. Others took hours, but most of them woke up. Eventually. Imagine that going to sleep in the Stone Age and waking up in the iPhone era. Off topic, but did you know that lobsters technically don't die of old age? Their cells don't age the way ours do. Instead, they just get bigger, heavier, and eventually die from exhaustion or because they molt themselves into a bad situation. Kinda tragic, but also kind of like this bug rewriting our ideas of what living mean. You shift in your code and glance out toward the endless white horizon. Back in the real world, people are checking weather apps and complaining about drizzle. Here, weather doesn't change, it is eternal cold. A fridge with no off switch. And somewhere under this frost, 1,000 more of these bugs are likely sleeping, folded up, limbs tucked against thoraxes, not dreaming, not waiting, not doing anything, just being or unbeing. You're not even sure anymore. There's a quote you remember from a crusty old science text. Death is the absence of movement. But what of stillness that persists? That might be this bug's entire autobiography. And yet, despite everything, it's fragile. Step on it while it's thawed and that's it. Game over, no respawn, no second act. That's the irony. It can survive glacier ages but not your hiking boot. Like some eternal USB drive that can endure a supernova but shatters if you drop it in the sink. You tilt the container gently, careful not to disturb the microenvironment. The midge doesn't move. Of course it doesn't. It's locked in place like a speck of carbon in a snow globe. And still, it feels like something is watching you back. You shake the thought off. Been in the cold too long. You talk to your gear like it's a pet now. Next thing you know, you'll name the bug. Or worse, start giving it advice. You check the timestamp on your watch. Time in this place feels more like a rumor than a rule. You mark the hour in your notes anyway. Subject, status unchanged. Still in frozen state. No decay, no dehydration. Estimated freeze duration E Celsius unknown. Theory, indefinite freeze possible due to cryoprotectants in tissue. Internal vitals inaccessible. Personal note. How does one write poetry about a bug that doesn't breathe? You laugh out loud and the sound bounces off the tent walls with a hollow cheer. It's just you, your field kit, and a creature older than agriculture that pretends not to exist. There's something comforting about that. In a world so obsessed with speed push notifications, calorie counts, 3-minute playlists, this bug's only flex is its ability to do nothing, perfectly, for thousands of years. Maybe it's the ultimate protest. Maybe that's the secret to winning at life. Just don't play. The wind sharpens outside, hissing across the barren landscape like it's trying to carve the ice into something new. You press a hand against the tent wall and feel the faint, unforgiving push of cold air trying to remind you who's boss out here. But inside, your focus isn't on the weather. It's on that tiny frozen shape sealed in its block, a creature that has survived not one, not two, but 3 separate ice ages without blinking. The Antarctic midge doesn't get enough credit. Most animals that face glaciation either run, die, or evolve dramatically. This bug, it just lies down, folds its legs neatly, and freezes itself until the planet calms down. Ice Age coming hit. Snooze. Another one, snooze again. Somewhere deep inside your jealous human brain, you're starting to respect the simplicity. You imagine the first time the glaciers came creeping over the landscape. Not fast like in the movies. It wasn't a tidal wave of snow. It was slow like a thought forming at the back of the Earth's mind. The temperature dropped 0.5 degree, then another. Forests turned into grasslands, then into tundra. Then into what you see now, a bleached, bone-white world with no room for mercy. Back then, mammoths still walked these lands. Saber-toothed cats prowled the edges. Giant sloths dragged their shaggy limbs across the permafrost. And somewhere beneath a moss-covered rock, a tiny larva curled into itself, drained its moisture, and turned into an icicle with dreams. Historians still debate whether this specific lineage of midge experienced all three major Pleistocene glaciations, or if descendants simply inherited the frozen torch. Either way, the bug's survival strategy is older than your entire species. Let that sink in while you sip instant coffee from a titanium mug. You take another look through the glass. It's like staring into a time capsule. Not of a civilization, not of a culture, but of stillness, of pause. This midge didn't flee from the advancing cold. It absorbed it, became it. It made peace with the cold in a way humans never could. Funny thing about glaciations, people think of them as single events like one long frozen winter. But ice ages come in waves, like the ocean inhaling and exhaling over tens of thousands of years. The last glacial maximum was around 20,000 years ago. Before that, other deep freezes stretched across hundreds of millennia. The midge didn't just survive one epic freeze, it surfed the entire climatic playlist. Did you know the word glacier comes from the Latin glacis, meaning ice, and the French glace, meaning both ice and mirror? Poetic right. Like the earth looking at itself in a cold reflection. Maybe this bug is the speck in the mirror's corner, quiet, ignored, and impossibly patient. You run your fingers along the edges of your notebook, flipping through scribbled diagrams and temperature logs. One page catches your eye, a sketch of 3 lines, each one labeled with a glacial epoch. Beneath them, a dotted line connecting each representing the persistence of Belgica Antarctica. You drew it half-jokingly. Now it looks like prophecy. This insect has lived through more planetary reset buttons than you have teeth. The glaciers came, the glaciers left. Continents shifted. Oceans rewrote coastlines. Species blinked out like burned-out bulbs. But the midge, it kept hitting pause, and unpause, and pause again. You reach down to a tray of sample jars. Inside one, a partially thawed midge from last season, still alive somehow. Its legs twitch when exposed to warmth. It doesn't run or panic, it simply resumes. No drama, no screaming, just a quiet continuation. That's the part that unnerves you most. Not that it survives, but that it doesn't even seem surprised. If this bug had a motto, it would probably be, "Oh, this again." You scribble into your log. Subject physiology suggests minimal cellular degradation across multiple freeze-thaw cycles. Estimated exposure to glacial events aligns with paleoclimate data models. Behavioral response remains absent. Question: can memory persist across frozen states? Memory. That's a thought. Could it remember the last time it was warm? Probably not in the way you do. No glowing fireplaces or hot tea to miss. But perhaps in some biochemical way, its body registering, "Ah yes, this enzyme reacts now," like a muscle flexing at the return of summer. You stand up and stretch your legs. Outside, the sky has turned that particular kind of gray that feels heavy even when it's not snowing. You unzip the tent and step out, boots crunching down on ancient ice. Your breath ghosts in the air. Somewhere deep beneath your feet, another generation of bugs is probably frozen mid-bite, locked inside little icy pockets like nature's glitching hard drives. 3 ice ages, 3 planetary winters. If this were a fantasy novel, you'd call it immortal. But it's not immortal, it's just very, very good at being temporarily absent. You whisper into the cold more to yourself than anything. You really outlived the mammoths, huh? No answer? Of course not. But it feels right to say it. You head back inside, seal the tent flap, and huddle over your notes again. There's something deeply comforting in this insect's refusal to give up. No drama, no complaint, just a kind of patience that your species never evolved. You hear a faint buzz in your ears, probably the generator warming up again. Or maybe just your brain cycling through thoughts too big for the space between your ears. One more glance at the frozen bug. You feel smaller every time you look at it. Smaller but quieter too. And you think, maybe the lesson here isn't how to survive. Maybe it's how to wait. The heater hums softly in the corner of the tent, fighting a losing battle against the cold seeping through every seam. You stare at your thermos, contemplating whether lukewarm counts as hot when everything around you is trying to turn solid. Then your eyes return always to that little glass container and the frozen thing inside that's never needed warmth in the first place. This bug should be mush. Any normal organism, anything that doesn't have a science fiction plotline for a metabolism, would have exploded from the inside out. Let's talk about that. The real miracle of Belgica Antarctica isn't just that it freezes and wakes up. It's how it avoids the natural catastrophe of freezing, the slow-motion biochemical horror of internal ice. Your body, like most, is made mostly of water. When water freezes, it expands. And expansion in tight places is never polite. It rips, it slices, it bursts cells apart from the inside like microscopic grenades going off in slow motion. A single hard freeze could shred you on a cellular level. It's the same reason you can't just cryogenically freeze humans and expect a revival scene with jazz hands later. But this insect, it's got better chemistry. As winter creeps in here, or in whatever corner of Antarctica it calls home, the midge begins a transformation. It starts to produce compounds known as cryoprotectants. Sugars like trehalose, glycerol, even unique proteins that prevent ice crystals from forming the way they usually would. These molecules act like antifreeze in a car engine, except way more elegant. They don't just lower the freezing point, they actually stabilize the cells. Instead of turning into jagged blocks, the water inside its tissues transitions into a glassy, amorphous state. It vitrifies. Which, by the way, is also what scientists hope to master in human cryopreservation, but no offense, we are way behind this bug. Historians still debate whether the midge developed this biochemistry specifically for cold, or whether its ancestors were already playing around with dehydration resistance, and this was just a cold weather remix. Either way, it nailed the formula. You scribble a note into your journal. Midge's antifreeze was better than mine. You sip your thermos again, still disappointingly tepid. Honestly, it feels a little insulting. Your body, with its layers of insulation and hot drinks and fire-starting know-how, can barely function out here. Meanwhile, this insect just freezes itself into a brittle statue and somehow avoids turning into bug cycles. Unfair. There's a running joke among cryobiologists. If you want to survive freezing, don't be human. The joke has teeth. While we're out here inventing NASA-grade space blankets and sipping hot electrolyte soups, the midge is flexing on us with nature's version of nanotech. You glance over at your gear table where a stack of scientific papers sit half-read. One diagram in particular draws your eye. It's a color-coded map of protein activity during freezing. Bright blues for inactivity. Red spikes for sudden surges in antifreeze proteins. You trace the lines with your finger, almost like you're reading sheet music. There's poetry in how this bug's body knows when to go quiet. One gene after another shutting down like lights across the city at midnight. And in their place, these cold-defiant molecules rise up, orchestrating a symphony of pause, protection, and preservation. Odd fact, time wood frogs in North America also freeze themselves. Heart-stopped, lungs collapsed, no breathing for months, and survive. They use similar antifreeze compounds, but they can only go through 1 or 2 freeze-thaw cycles before the wear and tear adds up. The Antarctic midge, though, it can do this dozens of times in a single lifespan. No big deal. Just business as usual. You close the notebook and sit back. The bug hasn't moved, of course. still curled in its glass enclosure, still dreaming of nothing. But you can almost imagine the microscopic ballet happening inside it. Proteins fluttering into position, sugars locking into place like scaffolding, water exiting the cells in tiny calculated retreats. No panic, just precision. You tap the container gently. You're a better chemist than me. Outside, the wind howls again. You zip your parka higher, pull your hat down tighter, and consider that Belgica Antarctica doesn't need hats, or heaters, or thermoses. It just has its body, its chemistry, its script written into every cell that says survive. Quietly, efficiently, unapologetically, you start recording another audio note, your voice low and gravelly from the cold. Day 16. Subject remains frozen. Internal tissues, as far as testing allows, show no sign of crystallization. Metabolic function suspended but not degraded. Suggest further study into the stability of cryoprotectant ratios. You pause. Personal thought, it's like watching time forget something, and that thing forgetting time right back. You turn off the recorder. Then you chuckle, not because of anything scientific, just because you remembered the time you left a soda can in your home freezer and opened it 6 hours later. One loud pop, and your kitchen looked like a carbonated crime scene. The midge. It doesn't pop, it doesn't even fizzle. You glance back at the insect. You know what this is starting to feel like. Jealousy. This bug's been out here doing its thing through 3 ice ages, and you're just a warm-blooded temporary with a flashlight and a timer. Sure, you get to listen to music, but it gets to pause the universe. The difference. You burn calories to live. It saves itself by stopping. And suddenly, that feels smarter than it should. The ice creaks somewhere in the distance, a slow groaning sound, like the planet exhaling in its sleep. You lift your head. That noise never stops being eerie. You'd think something as large and ancient as a glacier wouldn't need to make its presence known. But it does. It shifts its size, it grumbles. You'd almost swear it was talking in its own language. You listen for a moment. Just the slow breath of frozen things. And under all of it, the insect remains frozen in its little container, a relic of the Pleistocene, a survivor of what scientists romantically call the long exhale of the Earth. That's what the last ice age really was in the grand scheme of time, a breath. An inhale of snow and silence, a long drawn-out moment when the world wrapped itself in cold and let everything slow down. When you picture an ice age, it's tempting to imagine a planet instantly gripped by a blizzard. But in reality, these things creep in like a whisper. A few degrees drop over thousands of years. Rain becomes snow. Forests retreat. Grasslands become permafrost. It's like turning down a thermostat in excruciating slow motion. You walk outside the tent, your breath trailing into the morning gloom. The landscape is blinding, a wash of white that stretches into the kind of infinity that makes your pupils contract out of respect. You kneel and scoop a handful of snow, let it melt in your glove. Water from an ancient sky. Who knows, this very moisture could have been around the last time that bug woke up. During the Pleistocene, ice sheets blanketed nearly 30% of the Earth's landmass. That's not snowdrift, we're talking walls of ice, a mile thick, dragging across continents, remaking coastlines, scraping valleys into shape. They didn't just visit the world, they remodeled it. And yet, somewhere beneath the crush of that endless winter, the Antarctic midge found a way to wait. That's the part that keeps tugging at your brain. It didn't fight the cold. It didn't avoid it. It endured it in the most passive-aggressive way imaginable by pretending not to exist. Historians still debate how creatures like the midge migrated or didn't during those frigid eras. Did their populations shrink to isolated refuges, surviving under stones and lichen and frost-hardened moss? Or did they hang on in buried ecosystems no one's even found yet? Entire micro-worlds preserved beneath glaciers like prehistoric terrariums. You pull your hood tighter and walk a few paces from the tent. Just you and the quiet now. And under your boots, permafrost. Ancient buried cold. Down there, meters deep, organic material stays locked for thousands of years. Grass seeds, pollen insect eggs, sometimes even carcasses with skin still soft. It's Earth's deep freezer and it doesn't throw anything out. Did you know there's a Siberian worm that scientists revived after 42,000 years frozen in permafrost? It twitched, it moved, it lived. You start to wonder what other things are just resting, waiting. You pause beside a shallow ridge where the ice has peeled back to reveal dark lichen crust. Life here doesn't glow, it endures. It holds on by the edges, keeps its breath shallow. Same as the midge. And you warm soft, full of caffeine, and constant thoughts feel oddly out of place. Back inside the heater hums again. You sit cross-legged beside the sample container and watch the ice crystals around the bug. Nothing has changed. Of course not. This isn't a time for change. You scribble a note. Time moves, but it doesn't push this creature forward. It simply passes. You try to picture it, this bug alive 100,000 years ago, back when the planet was still cooling off from its last temper tantrum. Glaciers sliding south, hunting woolly rhinos into cornered valleys, saber-tooths stalking herds across snow plains. And down beneath it all, the midges, larvae clinging to rocks, curling into themselves, excreting glycerol, transforming their bodies into glassy sculptures. Not dead, not sleeping, just gone from the rules of time. You lean closer. The ice around the midge seems just a little more translucent today. Could be the light, could be your imagination. But something about it makes you slow your breathing. What would it feel like to come back after thousands of years? One blink and the mountains would be different. The sky cleaner or maybe dirtier. The air would taste foreign. The vibrations in the ground would carry strange rhythms. Electric hums, distant aircraft languages never spoken before. Would it notice or would it just crawl forward like nothing happened? That's the strange beauty of this thing. It doesn't register the drama. It's not built to be amazed. It wakes up, eats if it can, maybe mates, then folds away again. No journal entries, no PTSD, no songs about the 3 winters it outlived. You shift your weight. You're starting to realize we obsess over survival like it's a conquest. But this bug hustle. It treats survival like maintenance, like brushing your teeth. Nothing heroic, just procedure. You close your notebook and sit quietly for a while, just breathing. Outside, the glacier groans again. Not angry, just shifting. Just being. And in the silence that follows, you start to understand some lives aren't loud. They're not meant to be heard, not meant to sing or scream. Some lives are meant to pause, to glide through ice ages with no footsteps, to slip between the layers of time without leaving prints. To wait perfectly still while the world forgets their name. And then when the sun returns, they breathe. You wake to silence. Not the silence of still air or empty space, but the heavy padded quiet that only comes when nothing on earth is moving, not even time. It's the kind of hush that sinks into your skin like snowfall on bare shoulders. Outside the tent, the frost glows under a pale sky, no clouds, no sun, just that milky Antarctic nothingness. Inside, the heater gave up hours ago. You can feel it in your toes first, numb, slow, unsure if they belong to you. You pull your blanket closer and glance toward the container. The bug, of course, hasn't moved. Still that same black fleck curled like a forgotten comma in a sentence no one's finished writing. It's hard not to project human things onto it. Fear, memory, sleep, but sleep is wrong. Sleep is full of dreams and twitching fingers. This is not that. This is suspended animation. A biological contradiction where the body pauses so thoroughly it forgets decay. The midge doesn't age in its frozen state. It doesn't think, doesn't deteriorate, doesn't process the passage of time. That's what gets you. Not the stillness, but the implication this creature has nobody, it's been frozen. If you thought it right now, it would not be shocked. It would not gasp or stumble or blink against a blinding new world. It would simply resume. Historians still debate whether such suspended states should count as a form of time travel. Not the flashy kind with wormholes and paradoxes, but the organic kind, a creature skipping centuries with the biological equivalent of holding its breath. You write a question in your notebook. Does time still exist if your brain doesn't? Because that's the heart of it. Inside this insect, there is no awareness, no passage. The clock didn't tick forward in the dark. It stopped. Or maybe it turned in on itself and waited to be wound again. You look at the bug's head under the magnifier. Tiny, expressionless. You'd like to imagine some spark of consciousness frozen inside, but you know better. It's not sleeping. It's paused at the molecular level. Proteins folded into dormancy. Nerve impulses suspended. No dreams. Odd fact, some sea cucumbers can liquefy their internal organs and rebuild them later. A weird flex, but nature does love a party trick. In comparison, the midge's party trick is silence. A deeper kind, one that outlasts your definitions of alive and dead. You sip cold tea, cold everything always, and scroll through yesterday's notes. One line stands out: to wait without knowing you're waiting. You wonder what that must feel like, but then realize it doesn't feel like anything at all. There's no you in that pause. No thoughts drifting under the ice, just an absence of everything. It's almost spiritual if you squint. A biological limbo. You lean over the container and speak to it softly. Did you dream of the last glacier? Of when the sky used to taste like snow and mammoths were loud and shaggy and alive? The midge says nothing, as always. But still you picture it frozen under layers of rock and frost, while mountains melted and reformed overhead. Whole civilizations came and went, fires lit, temples rose, empires fell, and it was still through all of it. You flip to a new page in your journal and draw a rough image, Earth rotating with the tiny silhouette of a bug motionless across eras, a little timeline of stillness while everything else collapses in motion. The heater stutters back to life, coughing out weak warmth. You rub your hands together and press them against the glass case, not to warm the bug, just to remind yourself that you're still moving, still metabolizing. There's a kind of envy growing in you now. This bug doesn't panic, doesn't overthink, doesn't rush to live before it dies. It simply waits, with perfect stillness. You can't do that. You check your phone battery twice an hour. You fidget. You daydream during long pauses. The midge. It does none of that. It skips over time the way some animals skip over puddles, gracefully, effortlessly. You think back to the scientists who once thawed a frozen midge after decades in storage. It woke up, crawled a little, and went on with its tiny, uneventful life. No dramatic flourish, no David Attenborough monologue, just legs moving again like the pause button had never been hit. And here's the part you keep circling back to: it isn't reacting. It isn't processing. The midge doesn't remember being frozen. It doesn't long for summer. It doesn't hope or dread. It isn't resisting the cold. It is the cold. Or at least it is compatible with it. Like a living bookmark in the middle of Earth's most boring novel. You laugh under your breath. Maybe I'll write a poem about you, you tell it. Frozen bug haiku. All stillness, no verbs. Outside the sky shifts just slightly. Not a full sunrise. More like a flicker of lighter gray bleeding into darker gray. You wonder how the midge knows when to unpause. Is it light, heat, moisture, or just a combination of cues that finally cross a threshold in its silent script? You jot it down, wakes when the world remembers it again. The idea unsettles you, that something can exist only when the environment allows. Not fighting to be seen, not demanding survival, just floating in possibility. And then it hits you: this insect is the opposite of fear. Humans fear death, decay, change. This thing doesn't. It doesn't care about movement or stasis. It just is in a way that feels almost divine. You exhale slowly, fogging the glass one last time. Then whisper, lucky you. You don't even know you survived. You sit still for a long time as if trying to imitate the bug's stillness. Not easy. Your foot twitches. Your knee aches. Your body's a mess of little background complaints, hungry, tired, cold in places you didn't know could be cold. But the midge encased in its frosty tomb remains motionless, weightless, untouched by any discomfort. It looks fragile, like one breath could scatter it into dust. And yet here it is, the frostbite that never comes. It should be dead. By every human standard, this creature should be dead a dozen times over. Flash frozen, desiccated, deprived of oxygen, its tissues reduced to powder. And yet against every expectation, it's fine. You lean forward, studying the black speck under the magnifier again. Somewhere in there, past the glassy skin, past the curled-up legs, is a secret that still baffles science. Because this bug doesn't just survive cold, it survives inside the cold like it was born in an idea too extreme for most biology. It's not just resisting frostbite, it's rewriting the rules of what frostbite even is. Most animals, including you, would be ripped apart at the cellular level by freezing. Ice expands inside your body. It bursts open your soft parts, like blowing up water balloons in a microwave. Even mild frostbite causes capillaries to constrict, starving your skin until it dies. And if the freeze is sudden, that's worse. Fast freezing is brutal. The kind of brutality that leaves you with blackened fingers or no fingers at all. But Belgica Antarctica, it doesn't play that game. Before freezing hits, the larva starts pulling water out of its cells and shoving it into spaces where ice won't do damage. What's left behind isn't empty, though. It's infused with trehalose and glycerol sugars that protect protein structure and act as cryoprotectants. Basically, nature's version of antifreeze with a PhD. Historians still debate whether the exact process is controlled dehydration or something more like slow-motion vitrification. Some papers call it partial freezing. Others insist it's a living glass phase. But the result is the same. The ice doesn't kill it because the bug invites the cold in, like a vampire who learned to like garlic. You run a fingertip over your notebook. There's a sketch from earlier of a cartoon bug smiling in a block of ice sunglasses on arms behind its head. It was funny when you drew it. Now it feels more like truth. Because the deeper you go into the science, the more this bug starts to sound less like an insect and more like a perfectly engineered paradox. You pause, take a breath, and log an entry. Cell integrity remains stable. No visible signs of recrystallization. Theory: cryoprotectant density exceeds 20% total body weight in larval phase. Resistance to cold appears designed. That's the uncomfortable part, maybe. It's not just tough, it's perfectly built for this. Nature didn't slap this together by accident. The midge evolved on the absolute edge of survivability, and instead of stepping back, it leaned in. Became the ice. Let itself be shaped by a climate most creatures fled from. Odd fact: frozen wood frogs in Canada can survive their heart stopping for weeks, then revive with no permanent damage. They literally turn into frog-shaped ice cubes, then hop away come spring. But their window for this trick is short, once or twice a season. The midge. It can freeze and thaw repeatedly through its juvenile life. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. You glance at the thermometer, still below freezing. Not that it matters to the bug. As long as it doesn't melt, it's at peace. You, on the other hand, are considering wearing two hats. You pull a map of Antarctica from your gear bag, unfolded across your knees. Most of the continent is marked with the white of glaciers and ice shelves, but there are dots. Tiny black specks labeling exposed rocky outcrops. That's where these bugs live. Not under snow, not buried in ice, but in little slivers of land between the glaciers. Dry valleys, mossy cracks, harsh, brutal places where summer still means sub-zero nights. You mark a few on your map. Victoria lands some islands off the coast, each one a kind of insect sanctuary. A place where evolution quietly perfected the frost-proof formula. You shake your head. It's always the smallest creatures that hold the most outrageous secrets. You make another note. If you define intelligence as surviving impossible odds, maybe this thing is smarter than we are. It's not graceful. It is not fast. It doesn't fly or bite or sparkle. But it plays the long game better than anything you've ever studied. You stand and stretch, pressing your hand against the glass again. The warmth from your palm leaves a foggy print. Inside the midge remains still, but you can't shake the feeling that it's listening somehow. Not in a conscious way, just with the quiet arrogance of something that knows it's already won. You whisper, "What do you know that we don't?" No answer, obviously. But the silence feels heavier than before, like it could answer if it wanted to and simply doesn't see the point. Because it doesn't fear the cold, doesn't even endure it. It uses it, leans into the freeze, lives in the space most things retreat from. And you're just visiting. The wind picks up again, brushing snow like breath across the tent flaps. You look up from your notes. Outside, the ice stretches endlessly, but in your mind, you're somewhere else, long ago, deeper in time, before humans left even their first footprints. Before the world quieted under this modern chill. You're standing in a valley beneath glacial cliffs, the sky thick with woolly breath. Mammoths lumber past each footfall, muffled in the snow. You can feel the weight of them alive, steaming, massive. Every breath they exhale drifts into the cold like incense. And in the shadow of their ancient feet, something else waits. Smaller, colder, timeless. This is the world the Antarctic midge survived. Imagine that. The giants of the Pleistocene walked trumpeted fell, and beneath their rumbling presence under the very frost, their feet compressed. The midge tucked itself away, not in defiance, but in stillness. The mammoth roared. The bug went quiet. Guess which one still has descendants today? That's the brutal beauty of this creature's survival. It never had to fight the mammoth. It just had to outwait it. You make a note in your journal, "Survivor of the mammoth's breath." It sounds dramatic, almost mythological. But it's not hyperbole. These two creatures lived at the same time on the same Earth in overlapping climates. One weighed 10 tons, the other less than a grain of sand. Only one had to learn how to freeze. Historians still debate how much the Antarctic ecosystem has truly changed since the Pleistocene. Some argue that the continent has remained stable in its extremes, dry valleys, and bare rocks still resembling their ancient selves. Others suggest deeper changes, slow-moving shifts in microbial networks, moss coverage, and even the amount of airborne salt and UV radiation. But the fact remains, this bug didn't need a new planet to survive. It just needed time. You tilt the glass container slightly, angling it toward the outside light. No reaction. No movement. Just that tiny, dark comma against the frost. It has no lungs. No mouth parts in its larval form. It doesn't sigh, but you imagine it's still here long after the last mammoth sighed its final frozen breath. Did you know there are still grass seeds buried in the Siberian permafrost that scientists have successfully germinated? Seeds from 32,000 years ago. They bloomed, stretched, lived again. You begin to suspect there's an entire ancient world just waiting quietly, underground, biding its time. The midge, unlike those seeds, doesn't bloom. It doesn't unfurl into something photogenic. It crawls, slowly, methodically. When it reawakens, it isn't celebrating. It's continuing. You open your audio recorder again. Day 17. No thaw. Temperatures holding. Sample stable. Cellular collapse none. Personal note. The idea that this creature outlived megafauna is starting to mess with my sense of scale. You close the recorder and glance at your own reflection in the steel mug beside it. Pale. Tired. Not built for the cold. You think about how humans had to invent language, clothing, fire spears, all to do what this insect achieves with silence. It's strange how evolution sometimes chooses noise, fangs, color, screaming, and sometimes chooses stillness. You step outside again and breathe in the sharp, dry air. The cold here is like no other. It doesn't bite, it smothers, takes the heat out of you like a quiet thief. Even your breath feels reluctant, as if air itself wants to be solid. You stare out across the ice field and imagine the mammoths again, their slow movements, their heavy coats. You picture one collapsing after a life long lived, its body freezing in the snow, and a few feet beneath it a larva in a crack of stone completely unaware. One life enormous and momentous, the other unnoticed and eternal. You write in the notebook again. Size means nothing in the end. Stillness is a survival strategy. Odd fact, when a tardigrade, a microscopic water bear, enters a cryptobiotic state, it can survive outer space. Actual vacuum, radiation, dehydration, they shrink down, curl up, and wait. Sound familiar? It seems nature loves these quiet rebels. The ones who say, I don't need the race, I'll sit this one out and catch up after the finish line. You kneel beside the container again. The frost inside glistens slightly, like hoarfrost catching the light. You press your hand to the side, not enough to change anything, just enough to remind yourself it's there, that it hasn't cracked or moved or breathed in your presence. You say aloud, they probably didn't even notice you, huh? The mammoths. It's a silly thought. Of course they didn't. But, the bug noticed them in a way. It noticed their absence. It noticed their warmth retreating from the earth. And when the world became quieter, colder, it didn't panic. It simply followed suit. Paused. Waited. You feel it again, that strange humility. The way this bug seems to belong to time in a way you don't. You measure your days in steps, emails, coffee. It measures nothing. It lets the world move around it like a river around a stone. A sudden gust of wind lifts the snow in a swirl. You shield your eyes. When it clears, nothing's changed. The same stark sky, the same hills. You think that's how it must feel to the midge when it wakes up. Everything different, but nothing different. You whisper one last thing into the frost. Thanks for waiting for us to catch up. The frost hasn't melted in days, and your breath curls out like thread every time you exhale. The heater hums weakly, barely holding its ground against the cold, pressing in from every angle. You sit beside the container again as you always do. Same spot, same bug, still no movement. But today your thoughts are drifting backwards. You're thinking about leaves, not the scientific kind, not cell walls and stomata. No, this is about the last leaf this midge ever touched if it had the ability to remember. If its frozen mind could still hold a moment. You picture it a sliver of green against brown soil, low to the ground, waxy and cold. A brief bloom during one of Antarctica's short, brutal summers. The kind of leaf that barely catches the sun before vanishing again into snow and wind. And the bug crawling slowly, tasting it. Its last meal before the world iced over. We'll never know what that moment was really like. The Antarctic midge doesn't keep journals, but its gut might have held a microfilm of plant matter when it froze its last act before the long sleep. You write in your notebook, the leaf it once loved buried before it could rot. There's something heartbreakingly poetic about that. A final touch, a bite, maybe just a brush of its tiny antennae against something green, then cold, then silence. Historians still debate whether that kind of final act counts as memory. If a frozen body can remember the taste of chlorophyll, if an insect's nervous system records last impressions before shutdown, the idea dances on the edge of science and sentiment, and you're not quite ready to let go of it. Odd fact, some Antarctic moss species can regrow after being frozen for 500 years. They come back green, stubborn, unchanged. Just like that nature hits resume on a process everyone assumed was over. You imagine the midge on that ancient summer day. The ice had retreated just enough. Patches of sun warmed a few rocks, a little moss, a tiny leaf trembling in the breeze. The bug might have crawled out from under a stone, blinking into the lightless sky. And then it paused, sensed the temperature drop. The shadows growing longer. The chemical cues in its body began to shift. Water left its cells. Sugars thickened its blood. Organs folded inward. And the leaf, its last green moment, vanished beneath a layer of frost. You stand and step outside the tent, letting the air slap your face awake. Even here in the modern age, leaves are rare. Antarctica doesn't do lush. The only greenery comes in low, desperate forms, mosses clinging to rock, liverworts hiding in shadowed crevices. These aren't plants that sway in the wind, they crouch. You remember a site you visited last season where the moss formed a green smear over volcanic gravel. The ground was warm there, not inviting exactly, but less hostile. It reminded you that life, when pushed, will anchor itself in anything. Even rock, even ash. Back inside you sit again. The container glows slightly in the light, no movement, no breath. Just a body folded neatly around an ancient hunger. You make another note. If it wakes, will it remember to be hungry? It's a fair question. Some insects resume their lives as if the pause never happened. Feed, crawl, mate, die. Simple, efficient, but part of you wants this one to wake up with longing. For that forgotten leaf. For one more bite of something green before winter swallows it again. But maybe that's your memory projecting itself. You remember every meal you regret not finishing. The last good peach of the season. The sandwich you dropped. The coffee that went cold too fast. You assign meaning to food because you assign meaning to everything. The midge. It assigns function. You tap the glass, nothing. You look closer. The frost inside the container has shifted slightly. A minor crack near the edge like a whisper in the ice. It's not near the bug, but it's there. You jot it down. You try not to feel anticipation, but it sneaks in. You whisper, "What was the last thing you tasted?" It's not a scientific question. Not one you can publish. But it's the one that keeps looping in your mind. Not because you need the answer, but because it's your only link to a moment before the freeze. That leaf, now long decayed, long gone, was once a part of this creature's story. A single act before silence. And maybe that's all any of us gets. One more touch of something real before the cold takes hold. You let your palm rest against the glass. The warmth from your skin fogs it over. You know it can't feel it. You're not even sure it will feel anything ever again. But if it does, if it thaws, maybe the memory of that leaf will return too. Not as flavor, not as hunger, just a faint signal deep in its chemistry. A flicker that says, once there was green. The sky outside looks the same as always, washed out light smeared across a canvas of forever. But today, the air carries a tension. Not a storm, not a change in pressure, something subtler. A kind of memory like the land is recalling something it had no business forgetting. You zip your jacket and step into it. The permafrost beneath your boots is solid, ancient, unbothered by your presence. And yet you can't shake the sense that it's more than just ground, it's archive. A layered memory of time so deep you could fall in forever. You know this place isn't just frozen, it's buried. Not like a tomb, there's no reverence in the cold here, just indifference. And somewhere beneath this icy crust is where midges like your specimen have waited for years or centuries, tucked into pockets of dirt and air and moss and frost, buried beneath the midnight sun. That's the part people forget. Antarctica isn't always dark. In fact, in the heart of summer, it never stops being day. The sun circles endlessly overhead like a spotlight nobody turned off. At its peak, the light hits every angle of the land, bleaching shadows into submission, and yet even in that strange brilliance, the ground never truly warms. Historians still debate how this continuous light affects microbial life and the fragile food webs hiding in crevices. Does it extend growing seasons? Interrupt the dormancy of cold-adapted species? Some argue the light is too shallow to do much at all. Others believe it shapes everything, whispering to seeds and spores and larvae, not yet but soon. You write in your notebook, sunlight with no warmth, the cruelest trick of all. Because you know the midge doesn't thaw with light. Not alone. It takes heat, moisture, a chemical cue too complex to mimic with a desk lamp. But still, the midnight sun is part of the story. You picture it now, your bug centuries ago buried in gravel between glacier toes, still and silent. Above it, the sky refused to darken for months. Blinding daylight, shadows with no edge. But the soil stayed cold, the ice stayed dry. Nothing changed except the slow, subtle shift of molecules inside its glassy body. The midge, like so many things here, doesn't fight the burial. It's not waiting to escape. It's part of the sediment now, an idea preserved in layers. You crouch beside a frozen stream bed where patches of ground have peeled open under the summer light. If you were to dig down a few centimeters, you might find life in slow-motion larvae, moss roots, nematodes, all curled into themselves like they're trying to remember warmths. You reach down and brush the surface. It flakes like shale. Underneath a patch of dark brown loam, ancient stuff. It smells faintly of nothing, airless, dried out, preserved. Back in the tent, you pull out your auxiliary container and extract a soil core from last year's trip. You slice it open carefully. Layers unfold like a cake made of time. Dry moss, ice-bonded gravel, a streak of guano from some unlucky bird, and then a few glistening black specks. You lean in. Under the scope, one of them shimmers. A midge larva, unmoving, perfectly still. You tap the table once, no twitch. And yet, you know it could come back. Did you know some rotifers, tiny aquatic animals, have been found alive in Siberian permafrost? After 24,000 years, they thawed. They swam. They reproduced. One moment a fossil, the next a mother. This is what Antarctica hides. Not just cold, not just death, but the potential for resurrection. You glance again at your specimen, the one in the original container. No change? But the frost on the edges has softened. A minor shift, microscopic maybe, but you see it. You log the entry, day 18. Solar exposure increasing. Subsurface temperatures unchanged. Observation edge. Frost appears reduced by approx. 0.3 mm, possibly light bleed-through from extended sun exposure. Subject immobile. Cell structure intact. You pause, then write. Buried under permanent daylight, light without heat, a sleeping thing with no sense of morning. The paradox strikes you. In a world flooded with sunlight, life still sleeps, because light alone doesn't wake the deep. You lean back. The air in the tent is warming slightly, but not enough to matter. And yet you find yourself holding your breath, listening, waiting, as if you might hear the thaw. But it doesn't come. Instead, there's the low rustle of wind outside. The endless drone of sunlight pouring in from every angle. The silence of something not yet. You step outside once more. The sun hasn't moved. Of course it hasn't. It's the same spotlight circling above you for weeks, bleaching time into one long moment. You whisper to the snow. This is where the world forgets what night feels like. And beneath it all, the bug forgets too. It doesn't remember darkness. It doesn't crave dawn. It just exists in a state between memory and function, buried under the brightest sky that never warmed it. And when the time finally comes, when the light and the heat return together, then maybe, just maybe, it will breathe again. But for now it stays buried, wrapped in clarity, silent under a sun that shines with no promise. You're not used to this kind of quiet. Not the kind where sound is missing, but the kind where it feels like the whole world is holding its breath. Even the wind outside has stopped whistling. Just the faint ticking of your wristwatch and the occasional plastic creak of the sample case adjusting to the room's gentle warmth. And still it hasn't moved. You lean closer to the glass. This bug hasn't blinked in centuries, which is impressive considering it doesn't even have eyelids. You're reminded of a story, half folklore, half footnote, in a research paper. A team of scientists deep in the frozen margins of the Antarctic coast had collected some long-dormant midge larvae. They were sealed in cryotubes marked shipped and eventually forgotten at the back of a research facility freezer for nearly 2 decades. Then someone thawed one, and it walked away. No drama, no triumphant orchestra swell, no Frankenstein moment. The larva just thawed, moved a leg, then another, and began crawling across the glass like it had just woken up from a nap instead of an ice age. Whispers from a scientist's freezer. You remember reading the paper, how dry it was, how matter-of-fact? Subject resumed locomotion following controlled thaw period. That's science for it lived. Historians still debate whether this counts as true revival or just delayed emergence. Was the larva ever truly dead? If it never stopped being, just stopped doing, does waking up even qualify as resurrection? You write down, no resurrection required when you never died. You press your fingers against the container again. There's condensation on the inside glass now. Just a kiss of moisture. The air's a degree warmer today thanks to that burst of sunlight earlier. Barely anything, but here barely is everything. You toggle your recorder, day 19. Sample temperature at 0.2 degrees SE. Internal core remains frozen but outer edge approaching melting point. Subject immobile. Personal note. Beginning to suspect revival may occur without ceremony. You click the recorder off, look at the bug. Still a speck, but it's the waiting that gets you. This slow, nerve-wearing countdown with no visible clock. You're watching a creature that could wake at any second or not at all. And when it does, it won't yawn. It won't tremble with relief. It'll just walk like it never left. You remember another odd case, a midge larva preserved in a desiccated state for over a decade. Not frozen this time, just dried. It was placed in a freezer removed stored at room temp, then accidentally left in a drawer. Eventually, someone added water and heat, and yep, it revived. Did a little lap across a petri dish like it had things to do. Odd fact. There's a term in microbiology, viable but non-culturable. It refers to organisms that appear dead under a microscope but spring back to life under the right conditions. The midge could be the poster child for that phrase. It's not dead, it's just on pause. You sip your tea cold again. Of course it is. Everything here trends towards stillness. Stillness except for your thoughts. You wonder what it means to wake up into a world that moved on without you. This midge doesn't know it's missed the rise of cities, satellites, online grocery shopping. But you do. You wonder if part of you envies its ignorance. To skip time? To simply not notice. The silence inside your tent is now so complete that the scratching of your pen sounds like static. You draw a little sketch, a larva lying beneath a scientist's freezer. Above it, thought bubbles, in one nothing in the next. You chuckle softly. This is what your life has become, drawing existential comics for a bug that's older than democracy. You write again. If it walks with history stuck to its skin. You check the specimen again. The condensation has grown. One corner of the glass now shows a visible sheen. That means the ice is sublimating, turning to vapor. That's a sign. And then, you swear the tiniest bubble shifts within the frost. You freeze, no pun intended. You squint closer, hold your breath. Wait, nothing. Or maybe something. The silence feels thicker now, as if it's pushing against your ears. You whisper, "Are you waking up?" It doesn't answer, obviously. But that doesn't stop you from staring like it might. Your mind is now running on two tracks: the scientist who wants to document the revival precisely, and the storyteller who wants to witness a miracle. But neither gets what they want, not yet. You write the moment before the moment. The pause before breath. You leave the tent for air. Not because you need it, but because your mind is humming too loudly. Outside, the wind is picked up again. Not aggressive, just moving. Like something stirring out here too. You look up. The sky hasn't changed. Still indifferent. Still endlessly gray, but it feels different, like a whisper in your chest. You take one last breath and step back inside. The container is waiting. Of course it is. And so is the bug. Not dead, not gone. Just waiting to walk away like nothing happened. You don't sleep that night, you try. But your eyes keep dragging open. You keep hearing things: imaginary clicks, phantom scuffles on glass, the soft shift of a body too small to echo. You lie there staring at the roof of the tent, waiting for a sound that may never come. In the morning, the frost is thinner on the container. Just a little. You sit up and wipe the condensation from the inside of your goggles. Then you lean in. There it is again, the midge. Same shape, same posture, no movement. But now you can see more of it. Its legs are visible, tucked, coiled almost. Its body still matte black, still glinting with a fine trace of icy dust. But something about it feels closer, not warmer, not awake, but somehow closer. You whisper, "Are you listening?" It's silly, you know. But you also know that this creature doesn't need ears to listen. Its entire body is a sensor. It doesn't speak in sound but in shifts, in signals. A language made of ice. That's what its biology is. A quiet communication between cells, sugars whispering to proteins, ice mapping pressure like braille, glycerol sliding into membranes, folding the blueprint of survival again and again like origami. There's no brain behind it, just the silent elegance of chemistry doing what it must. Historians still debate whether this counts as communication in the traditional sense. Can molecules be said to talk? Are we projecting intention onto reaction? The scientific answer is no. The poetic answer is absolutely. You grab your notebook and write. The midge speaks with a silence. Its language is slow. Frost, tension, pause, release. You stare at the frost along the edges of the container. How it creeps, recedes. How the cracks inside it form like veins. It reminds you of synapses, dendrites, like this frozen insect is thinking. Slowly, coldly, without opinion. Odd fact. Certain bacteria in Arctic permafrost produce proteins that read the cold like a map, responding to it, not with panic but precision. They shift shape. They alter their enzymes. They adapt not because they want to, but because their molecules know how. The midge is the same. When it begins to thaw, it doesn't rush. There's no sudden shock, no on switch. Instead, one part of it stirs chemically, likely the tissues in the midgut, primed to detect temperature. That part begins to tell the others, cell by cell, it's time. You write again. One molecule breathes and the rest follow. The more you study it, the more you start to understand this isn't a bug, it's a language system. A living message passed down through millennia, spoken in sugars, translated by temperature. You lean in again. No movement. But the ice around its head has melted fractionally. A small tear-shaped droplet clings to the inner glass. You blink once hard. You whisper, "Okay, say something." You imagine it speaking, not in words, not even in movement, just in presence. The way its tissues resist degradation. The way its shape remains exact, untouched. The way it endures like punctuation at the end of an unread sentence. What does it say? That time isn't linear. That breath is optional. That the body can go quiet without dying. You check your thermometer. Internal container temp, 0.1 degc. So close. You toggle your recorder. Day 20. Ice recession continuing. Larva body now 84% visible. No locomotion observed. External conditions seal. Personal note, the thaw feels conversational. You pause the recorder and sigh. The words feel absurd and accurate at the same time. Because nothing has changed, and yet everything feels like it's about to. Outside, the sky is blue for the first time in weeks. Not warm, just empty of cloud. Sunlight glances off the tent's reflective tarp, making the inside glow with pale gold. The heat is negligible, but inside the glass, that tiny shift matters. You sit beside the container notebook on your knees, pen in hand. You write as if you're taking dictation. First, the cold touches sugar. Then sugar touches water. Then water touches light. Then something returns. You stop. Look at the insect again. You think you saw a twitch in one leg. Not much, just the idea of motion. Maybe it didn't happen. Maybe it was the light or your own pulse. But maybe not. Because this is what revival looks like, isn't it? Not a sudden gasp, not a jolt, just a whisper. One signal passed molecule to molecule until a leg flexes, until a cell agrees. You recall an earlier experiment, someone recorded the gene expression of a thawing midge. Certain proteins activated in a specific order like lines in a forgotten chant. First came the heat shock proteins. Then the membrane repair enzymes, then movement. It was like a spell being recited. That's what this feels like. A quiet incantation. A prayer written into the DNA of a creature that doesn't know words but somehow knows what to do when the world shifts. You write once more. The spell begins beneath the ice. The midge remembers nothing, but its body remembers everything. And if you wait a little longer minutes, days doesn't matter. You believe it will speak again. Not in sound, not in gesture, but in the smallest shuffle. The ancient grammar of endurance. You wake in a daze, a crick in your neck from falling asleep upright, face pressed against your notebook. Ink smudges bloom across your cheek like ancient tribal paint. The heater buzzes low in the corner, but the cold still hovers just under your skin as if it's trying to find a way in. And the bug, still there, still motionless. But the frost on the inside glass is gone now. You sit up straighter, blinking, rubbing your face, then your eyes, then staring again to make sure. Yes, clear. For the first time since you started watching, since this whole private vigil began, the glass shows only the midge and nothing else. No haze, no icy veil. Just the tiny black shape exposed under the weight of your breath, your heat, your patience. It hasn't moved, not yet. But now you can see everything. The legs, the segmented body, the faint contour of its mouth parts curled inward like it's deep in thought. You whisper, "How many times have you outlived us?" Because that's the truth, isn't it? This thing has been here before. It survived more endings than we've counted. Humans like to think we're the protagonists of history. But you're beginning to realize we're just a subplot, a noise that came and might go. Meanwhile, this bug, the Belgica antarctica, has been surviving in the margins long before your species even knew how to cook meat. You make a note. Our years are chapters. Its centuries are footnotes. The midge doesn't just outlive. It waits out mass extinctions. It endured glacial cycles, watched the continents shift, rode through epochs on a wave of stillness. Remember when humans evolved somewhere around 300,000 years ago? The bug had already seen the world freeze and melt again twice. It didn't care. It didn't celebrate. It just continued, quietly, obscurely. Historians still debate whether that kind of survival should even count in evolutionary storytelling. It's not adaptation through arms races or ecological conquest. It's not dominance. It's stealth, disappearance, a refusal to play the game in the first place. Odd fact, cockroaches get a lot of apocalyptic hype, but many wouldn't last long in freezing temperatures. Meanwhile, this unassuming wingless midge is the one with the real doomsday credentials. You lean closer to the container. No frost, no condensation. The temperature inside is sitting just above zero now. That's the line. That's the edge. If it's going to move, it'll be soon. But still you wait. Because the truth is, this insect doesn't move on your timeline. It doesn't recognize your schedules, your watches, your attention span. It doesn't owe you a performance. It doesn't even know you're here. And yet, here you are. Waiting, watching, rooting for something ancient, frozen, and objectively indifferent to your entire existence. You press a hand to the glass again. Your warmth passes through it. You imagine what that must feel like if it feels like anything. A kind of proximity. A chemical nudge. A reminder. You whisper, "Wake up. We need to believe in something older than us." You wonder what it must be like to never die, but also never live in the way you do. To bypass the drama, the striving, the endless needing. To exist purely as potential, a coiled spring in the snow, ready to resume only when the world is right again. Not when you say so, when it decides. You right again. The bug has seen stars change names. Rivers die. Trees unlearn how to grow here. And still it waits, because time is something it wears lightly. You think about the fragility of your own world, the power grids, the apps, the infrastructure that collapses under its own weight every few decades. You think about species with lifespans measured in weeks that still burn hot with purpose. Everything around you is temporary, so temporary that it rushes just to feel like it matters. And yet the midge does the opposite. It slows, it freezes, it lets go of the need to matter. It just survives. And that may be the purest form of power. You record another note, day 21. Frost fully receded. Subject fully visible. No movement yet. Temperature holding steady at 0.2 degrees. Behavior unchanged. Suspense increasingly personal. You pause. Consider deleting that last line. Leave it, because you've become part of this now. Your breath is in the condensation. Your warmth is in the air. Your expectation is coiled as tightly as the larva's limbs. You think about all the times life nearly ended. Asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, human wars. Collapse after collapse. Each time the survivors weren't always the cleverest or the biggest or the strongest. They were the ones who hid, who endured, who stayed quiet while the noise died down. Like this bug. You make one more note before nightfall. If I don't live to see it move, I'll still know it can. Because that's the thing, isn't it? Knowing something can survive without being told. Without being seen, without being acknowledged is sometimes enough. You turn off the lamp, set the recorder aside, and just sit, waiting. Because even if it doesn't twitch tonight or tomorrow or ever again in your lifetime, you know what it is now. You know what it's done. And in a world that forgets everything so fast, that kind of knowing feels like victory. You've stopped looking at the clock. Time means less and less. The longer you sit beside this thing, you still track temperatures, still make notes, still whisper the occasional thought aloud to the tent walls, but deep down you know you're now tuned to its frequency. A slower one. One where a second is a ripple in ice and a day is just a polite suggestion. But today, something's different. You see it the moment you unzip the flap coffee steaming in your gloved hand. The condensation on the inside of the container has vanished completely. The glass is dry. And the midge? It's moved. Not far, not dramatically, but unmistakably. One foreleg has shifted outward. Its body, once curled tightly in a defensive coil, is looser now. A fraction longer. A gesture toward something that might resemble purpose. You blink once, twice, then you laugh. Just once. A short, startled exhale that fogs the tent and startles no one. It's waking up, not all at once, not theatrically, but gradually, like a song coming back into tune. First the foreleg, then the body softens, then barely detectable a twitch along its side like a memory surfacing in muscle. This is the moment. The sun outside hasn't changed, but it feels warmer. Not in degrees, your instruments still measure frigid mediocrity, but in presence. As if something inside the earth has turned over, muttering, "Okay, okay now," and the midge answers. Not with language, not with noise, just movement. The slow return of will. You scramble to jot notes. Day 22. Subject has begun thaw phase locomotion. Initial movement, anterior limb extension. No visible signs of distress or asymmetry. Crawling response shallow but deliberate. You stare as the creature adjusts itself again, tiny leg testing the glass like it's checking whether reality is still here. No fanfare, no surprise, just a return to process. You can almost hear it thinking, "Write this again." Historians still debate what awareness means in these frozen revivals. Is the midge rebooting memories, rebuilding neural networks? Or simply responding to chemical gradients with robotic precision? Most lean toward the latter, but watching it now, watching it decide to move even just a little, it's hard not to imagine something more than instinct. You write, when the sun returns, the midge doesn't rejoice. It resumes, as if it never left. Odd fact, some Antarctic fish have antifreeze proteins in their blood so potent their cells can thaw and refreeze without permanent damage. Scientists still haven't figured out how these proteins work without eventually breaking down. But they do. Nature isn't elegant because it's tidy. It's elegant because it works. You press your palm to the container gently, as if offering it your warmth. It doesn't respond, of course, but you can feel the shared temperature now. The barrier between you and it isn't frost anymore. It's just time. You whisper, "Welcome back." The midge lifts another leg. Slow, measured, careful. It's not confused. That's what strikes you most. There's no hesitation, no wobble. It's not gasping for orientation like a creature torn from stasis. It simply reboots. Like the thaw isn't a miracle, it's procedure. You remember reading about tree seeds found in a Siberian squirrel burrow, 30,000 years old? Scientists revived them. They flowered, produced seeds, life restarting from dust and memory. This feels the same, except more deliberate. Because this bug wasn't buried in the dark. It wasn't a seed waiting for warmth, it was a body. Frozen, hardened, preserved with molecular finesse, waiting. And now it's back. You step outside, let the pale light hit your face. The cold bites as always, but it feels less cruel now. Like the sun has remembered how to look at this place gently. You walk a few paces away and turn, staring at the tent. The canvas flutters slightly in the breeze, just enough to remind you that the world still moves. You whisper it's breathing again, not because it is not exactly. The larva doesn't breathe like you do, but it moves. It is again. That's close enough. You sit on a rock and sip your coffee, which is now basically ice-flavored regret. But you don't mind. Because in that tiny container, in the faint warmth of your presence, something that once froze through 3 ice ages has decided to move. And that's enough. You think we spend our lives trying to outrun time. Clocks, calendars, birthday candles, always forward, always fast. But this bug, it didn't run. It paused. And now with no audience, no reward, no fanfare, it continues. You laugh again. A real one this time. Light, short, not triumphant, but understanding. You write your final line for the day. The sun returned. And so did the bug. Not because it was waiting for the sun, not because it hoped, but because that's what it does. What it is. When the cold becomes kind, the bug begins again. Simple, quiet, true. You sit beside the container longer than you should, ignoring the chill. Your own aches, even the growl of hunger nudging your stomach. Because you can't look away. The midge is fully awake now. You barely saw it happen. There were no big moments. No scene change, just a slow progression of truth. 1 minute it was a specimen. Now it's a being again. Its legs flex slow and deliberate, like someone standing after centuries folded in prayer. Its tiny body glossy now in the lamplight shifts with a kind of quiet confidence. It's not scrambling or disoriented. It's doing what it's always done: survive, continue, exist. You breathe in through your nose, slow and steady. The midge is breathing too in its own strange way through spiracles along its body gas exchange. Beginning again after centuries of stillness. Not like you, but close enough. You share this breath in this tiny tent on this massive continent. 2 organisms, one old one just visiting, warming the same few cubic feet of air. You make a note. You breathe. It breathes. We're both here now. You watch it lift itself further, crawling in a slow arc across the container. It moves without memory, without hesitation. It doesn't care that the world has changed. It doesn't even know it has. It simply continues. You remember something, an old textbook line about resilience. How survival isn't about intelligence or speed or strength. It's about flexibility, adaptation, and sometimes the ability to disappear just long enough. This bug mastered that. 3 ice ages, hundreds of thousands of years of cold and chaos and planetary resets, and here it is. Not frozen, not fossilized, just walking again like it always planned to. Odd fact. Some jellyfish can revert their cells back to an earlier stage of development, essentially restarting their life cycle. Immortality in a sense, but not by moving forward, by looping back. The midge does something different. It survives by moving only when it must. You set your notebook down and just watch. And for a moment it lifts its body fractionally higher, antennae swaying gently. It's not looking at you. It can't really. But something about the motion feels aware. Not conscious, not personal, just part of the same space. Two warm things breathing. That's all. You sit quietly, letting the heat build in the tent, letting your thoughts settle. There's no great revelation, no thunderclap, just a strange, profound peace. The midge moves again, slower this time, settling back down into the corner of the glass, as if to say, "That's enough." You nod. And outside, the wind begins to rise gently, at first brushing the fabric like an old friend returning. The sky deepens to a bruised violet sun circling low again, never quite setting. You don't feel like a scientist anymore. Not entirely. Right now, you feel more like a witness. You whisper, "Thanks for showing up." The midge doesn't respond. But that's fine. It already did the impossible. It continued. And now, so will you. You exhale, long and slow, sharing this moment, this breath, this warmth with a creature that once lived beneath mammoth shadows. That slept through history and woke in your hands. Tomorrow you'll pack, take samples, head back to the lab. But tonight, you're just two survivors, sitting quietly, breathing together. And now, in the still hush of this frozen place, everything slows. Your breath is gentle. The wind hums faintly outside the tent, a lullaby of cold against canvas. Inside, the air is warm. Not by much, but enough. The midge rests now, alive in the simplest way something can be, moving just enough to say, "I'm here." You've seen what few ever witness. Not drama, not resurrection, but return. Slow, quiet, uncelebrated. A creature that once curled beneath glacial soil, that saw 3 ice ages pass like sighs in the dark, now breathes again beside you. And in this moment, the years blur. Your timelines overlap. Your instincts soften. Your thoughts quiet. You understand now that survival doesn't need to roar. It doesn't need to fight. Sometimes the strongest thing anything can do is wait. No resistance, no noise, just stillness. Uncompromising, undisturbed. This creature lived longer than empires, longer than language, longer than any record we've written. And when the ice finally let go, it didn't collapse. It didn't rejoice. It simply resumed. So you sit a little longer. Let the light soften. Let the cold air press gently around your shoulders like a closing book. And as the sun circles above without setting, without rushing, you feel something loosen inside you too. It's okay to pause. It's okay to survive quietly. It's okay to breathe, even if it takes 1,000 years to begin again.